Hi everyone, welcome to this lecture on OCI Identity and Access Management. My name is Rohit Rahi and I'm part of the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure team. So first look at what is the Identity and Access Management Service. Identity and Access Management Service, or the IAM service, enables you to control what type of access a group of users have and to which specific resources. So what type of access a group of users and to which specific resources. Now let's look into some of these terminologies. Resource is a cloud object that you create and use in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So compute instances, block storage volumes, virtual cloud networks, each of them are represented as resources, as cloud objects. Each OCI resource has a unique identifier, Oracle assigned identifier called an Oracle Cloud ID, sometimes also called as OCID. Now this service uses traditional identity concepts such as principals, users, groups, authentication and authorization, and there is a new capability called compartment. We'll look into each of these in greater details. So this graphic here, the visual here, tries to tell the main components, show the main components of the service. So as we talked about the Identity and Access Management Service, the main things to keep in mind are principals. Basically, principals, you can think about them as groups of users or instances. We'll talk about why instances are here, which access a set of resources. And these resources, for these principals, they need a specific kind of permissions. Basically, you can think about what is this requested, what are the permissions requested by principals. We represent them in OCI using this construct called policies, and the policies work on this new construct called compartments. So you can think about about this way. Resources have a logical place where they live, which is the compartment, and the policies acts on the compartment, and you basically attach the policies to the groups or instances so that these users can access these resources. So this graphic here tries to show the various components of the Identity and Access Management Service in a very visual manner. And don't worry if you don't understand all the details, we'll look into them in the subsequent slides and demos. So let's look into each of these in a little bit more detail. So a principal is an IAM entity that is allowed to interact with OCI resources, and like we said, everything you do in OCI is a resource. So whether it's compute instances, block volumes, or virtual cloud networks, each of them are represented as resources. Now there are two kinds of principal. One is called the IAM users, which are your users who access the cloud environments, and the others are instances, and we call them instance principals to distinguish them from just normal compute instances or database instances. Now users are persistent identities which you set up through this service to represent individual people, or it can be applications as well. Now when you sign up for an OCI account, the first IAM user is the default administrator, and the default administrator sets up other IAM users and also groups. Seems very logical. Now there is this security principle of least privilege enforced by the users. What does that mean? It means two things. Number one, users have no permission until they are placed in a group. It can be one group, or the same user can appear in multiple groups. That's number one. Number two, groups have at least one policy with permission to the tenancy, which means the whole account, or to a specific compartment, which is a sub portion, a section of your tenancy, and we'll look into what exactly compartments are. But those two conditions have to be valid, otherwise users by themselves cannot do anything within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Now what is a group? As it seems very logical, a group is a collection of users who all need the same type of access to a particular set of resources. So you can create any kind of group. You can create a group for database admins, storage admins, virtual cloud network admins, or even you can create groups for tied to your tenancy or compartments or regions. Again, you have the complete flexibility, but group basically means it's a collection of users who need the same type of access to a particular set of resources. That's sort of the guideline. Same user can be, like I said, can be a member of multiple groups. Now there is a special kind of principle which is called instance principle, and we'll discuss this more in the level 200 video and the modules. But just to give you an idea, instance principle basically lets instances and the applications which are running on those instances to make API calls against other OCI services. So for example, compute, you have an application running, it needs to go and access the storage layer, the object storage. So instance principle lets you make those API calls without the need to configure user credentials or keep a configuration file on the instance, because the storage service needs to authenticate the application, right? So you make the instance a principal, and so it can make API calls without really needing the user credentials or a configuration files. Otherwise you run into issues like rotating your credentials, and it's not a very secure mechanism. And we'll talk a little bit more about instance principles in our identity access management level 200 modules. So let's look at the different authentication mechanisms which are provided by OCI. The first one is very simple, something which you guys are all familiar using various web services, where you authenticate a principal by providing the username and password. So you use the password to sign in using, let's say, a web console. You get a one-time password when you set up your account. At your first login, you're prompted to reset your password. Seems very logical, very familiar with how you use some of the web properties. The second mechanism of authentication is using something called API signing key. And you use this, the use cases, when you are using the OCI API, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure API, in conjunction with the SDK or the CLI. So when you're running a command line interface and you're running some commands, you are basically using the API signing keys to authenticate who you are, as you know, from where you are running the CLI. And as you can see here, key is an RSA key pair in the PEM format, and you have some restrictions on the length, etc. In the OCI console, you copy and paste the contents of this public key file, and the private key file you keep with the SDK or with your own client to sign your API request. Again, very similar to how some of the other web services operate. The third one is something specific to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and it's authentication using auth token. Authentication tokens. Now these are Oracle generated token strings to authenticate with third-party APIs that do not support the OCI signature based authentication. We just looked into the API signing keys. So what are good examples? Well, a good example is our own autonomous offering doesn't support the OCI signature based authentication. So for example, if you are using an autonomous data warehouse and you want to authenticate, you want to, let's say, pull data from object storage, you would have to write this small code here so that your autonomous data warehouse can authenticate against object storage. So you have a username here, and you, instead of the password, you provide your authentication token, which are provided by OCI. Now, one thing to keep in mind is authentication tokens do not expire. Okay, alright, so we talked about authentication. Let's talk about authorization. Now, authorization specifies various actions an authenticated principal can perform. Now, in OCI, authorization is defined by providing specific privileges in these things called policies, and then you associate these policies with the principals. Like we saw with the users, policies also support security principle of least privilege. By default, users are not allowed to perform any actions. Policies cannot be attached to the users themselves, but only to the groups, and we'll look into what that exactly means. Now, policies are comprised of one or more statements, which are very sort of a human readable format. So what do these policies look like? In a very simplest manner, the simplest policies would be written around something like this. So you allow a group. So this as we said, the policies operate at the group level. It's not at the user level. You provide the group name here, and then you provide two. There is a verb, and we'll talk about in the next module what this means. Resource type, what kind of access you want, and you can be very granular here, and whether you want the access in a tenancy or you want in a sub tenancy in a compartment. And then you can also make it more complex by adding things like conditions. So one thing you are seeing here is there is no denied policy. Everything is denied by default. So that's again security principle of least privilege. You have to really write a policy saying allow this. Otherwise, if you don't write a policy, nothing can be done by your users. And then there is also concept of policy attachment and policy inheritance, and we'll again talk about this subsequently in the next modules. So with that, let me just log into the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, create a user, create a group, and not write a policy, and see what you can the user can do with just that. So as you can see here, I'm trying to log into the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So first thing you do here is provide the URL console.us-ashburn-1.oraclecloud.com. Now I'm trying to log into the Ashburn region, and you could log into Phoenix or some other region, and your URL might be different. So the first thing it's asking me is what's my cloud tenancy. And cloud tenancy, the simplest way to think about this is your cloud account. This is my internal Oracle account, which I use for myself and my team. And as I provided that, I'm logged in because previously I had provided my user name and password, so it authenticates me into the system. Now, as you can see here, this is the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. You can see various regions here, and this is just a partial set of regions. If I click on Manage Regions, I can subscribe to the other regions which are operational right now. So as you can see here, first thing I want to show you is there is something called a home region. This is where you signed your contract. This is where you probably got started. I have been here 3.5 years, so this was our first region, US West, Phoenix. This is my home region, and right now I'm logging into US East, Ashburn, and you can see all these different regions. Now you see these buttons saying subscribe to this region, so I click here, and now I'm subscribed to the Australia East region, and I'll subscribe to a couple of other regions as well, Brazil and Mumbai and Seoul and Zurich. So in total I should have 11 regions, because these are 11 regions which are operational today, and then we have 5 regions which are US government and Department of Defense regions. So this is where you subscribe your regions. Right now you can see, let me change to Ashburn, because this is where we logged it, right? So I'm in the Ashburn region. So to get to on the left hand side, you can see the menu, and the menu shows the various services we have available in OCI. So there's core infrastructure, there are databases, there is on data and AI, solutions and platform, and then there are services around governance and administration. We'll look into many of those services in subsequent modules. Right now let's look into identity and access management. So click on identity here, and you can see various tabs appear, right? So there's users, groups, dynamic groups. This is how you make use of instance. You define instance principles. There is policies, compartments, and so on and so forth. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on users, and you can see here a bunch of people who are on my team and myself. We are all here listed here as users, so let's go ahead and create a new user here. Because we are doing this training videos, I'll call this training user 1, and sorry, training user 1, and I would use the description here, training user, and I need to provide an email ID for password recovery. So let me just provide my Oracle ID here. All right, and then I create this user here. And now this particular user has been created. You can see training user 1. Now if I log in through this user, right, I could do things like multi-factor authentication, and it provides me what kind of my like you can see auth tokens here. I can generate an auth token. As we were talking, let's say we want to do a auth token for autonomous data warehouse. I could do this, right, and I have to copy this from my own records. But the thing which I can do here is I created a user, but there's nothing which I have created beyond it, right? So if I log in through this user, I would not be able to do anything. So let me first create a password, and this is the one-time password. So I'll copy this, and let me go ahead and create a group here as well. So I go into my identity menu, and I create a group. And you can see some groups here, like there is administrators group. When you create your account for the first time, you get this group. Let me create a training group here. So I'll create a training group, and this is a group for training users, and I'll create this group. And now what I can do is I can add my user into this group. So I could the user which we just created, training user 1, I could come here and I could add the user to the group. Now let me open an incognito window, and until now I have just created a user, I have created a group, I have not created anything beyond that. I have not written a policy for that particular group. So let me log in here using that particular user we just created. So first thing it will ask me to do is it will ask me for a username password, which makes sense because we just created that user, and hopefully I have the password with me, correct. And so as I did that, it was a one-time password, so it's asking me to change my password, and there are certain restrictions around what I can do as far as a new password is concerned. And let me just make sure that I have the same password here. And now you can see I changed my password, and I'm logged in as the training user 1 here, right? If I click here my profile, you can see that I'm a training user 1. So the thing I want to show you is if I come here, and of course we have not talked about virtual cloud networks, etc., but you can see that I don't see any ability to create any networks. And first thing it says is create, choose a compartment. So I chose this root compartment. What does that mean? We'll talk about that in the next module. But you can see here that it says that resource not found or authorization failed. And if I click on this and I try to create a network, the request would fail because I have not written a policy. And I have not really created, I have not authorized this particular user, training user 1, to do anything. So that is why you can see that, it says authorization failed or requested resource could not be found. So in the next module, what we are going to do is talk about policies, write a policy, and then see, what different kind of activities this particular user can perform. Thank you for joining for this lecture. If you have time, please join the next lecture on IAM policies. Thank you.